The question is that the committee has considered the draft Pollution Prevention and Control Fees and Miscellaneous Amendments Regulations 2025. Shadow Minister Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon, and I am pleased to respond to the draft regulations on behalf of His Majesty's opposition. This legislation, as we've just heard, will increase the hourly rate of fees charged under environmental regulations related to the offshore oil and gas industry. There may not be an impact assessment for this specific change, but it is part of a broader shift in energy policy that is increasing costs and threatening the viability of our offshore industries. It is, I'm afraid, economic madness to refuse to issue new licences in the North Sea and tax the oil and gas sector out of existence. Doing so only makes us more dependent on dirtier foreign imports.
Correct.
Instead, because importing liquefied natural gas produces 4 times the emissions of North Sea oil and gas, and it puts around 120,000 jobs at risk and will lead to less revenue for the Exchequer in the long run at a time when the public finances are under strain. I'd like to invite the Minister to see the madness of this approach. We are refusing to drill for our own natural resources while importing oil and gas drilled from the very same seabed from Norway, impoverishing ourselves and enriching the Norwegians. The company profits, the jobs, the prosperity and security, the tax revenues, it all goes to Norway when it could also be ours. It is surely no coincidence that we now have the highest industrial energy prices in Europe, while data published yesterday shows that the output of our energy-intensive industries has fallen to a 35-year low. Removing oil and gas from the equation is an ideological and destructive move. It does not serve our national interest or help our struggling industries. The government should be much more hard-headed about its approach towards energy. Lower prices, more jobs, higher growth and stronger revenue should be the objectives, not ideology. Instead, the Energy Secretary is driving us towards economic and national decline.
In a blistering attack on Labour's energy policy, former Downing Street chief Nick Timothy has accused Keir Starmer's party of sabotaging Britain's energy independence while propping up foreign economies. In a speech that echoed deep frustration across Britain's post-industrial heartlands, Timothy laid bare what he described as the insanity of a political class more concerned with appeasing environmental lobbyists than securing national resilience. "We are refusing to drill for our own natural resources," Timothy said, while importing oil and gas drilled from the very same seabed from Norway, impoverishing ourselves and enriching the Norwegians. It's a line that cuts to the heart of a growing divide in Britain's energy debate. As Labour continues to court green credentials ahead of the next election, critics are warning that the price is being paid by British workers, households, and national security. Timothy's speech, delivered at a conference on energy and industrial strategy, reflects a resurgent anxiety among conservative and centrist circles alike that the UK's net zero crusade is being weaponized against its own working class backbone. Labour has promised a clean energy transition, pledging to end new oil and gas licenses and double down on renewables and offshore wind. Shadow Energy Secretary Ed Miliband frames it as a modern industrial revolution. Green jobs, net zero targets, and moral leadership on climate change. But Timothy and many industry leaders see a different reality. Transition without capacity is just a blackout waiting to happen. He said, offshore wind is intermittent, nuclear projects are decades away, and Britain's energy grid is already stretched thin. Timothy argued that until reliable baseload alternatives are fully operational, turning off the taps prematurely will only deepen dependency on foreign imports. The speech also tapped into a growing discontent among Britain's industrial workers and unions who, though traditionally aligned with Labour, are increasingly wary of the party's green shift. Oil and gas workers in Scotland, as well as offshore technicians, have warned that Labour's phase-out plan threatens tens of thousands of jobs. Timothy positioned himself as a voice for those workers, painting Labour as a party that listens to Extinction Rebellion, but not to the people who keep the lights on. Nick Timothy's intervention is more than a partisan jab. It reflects a growing anxiety across the political spectrum that Britain is sleepwalking into an energy crisis of its own making, while Labour insists its plans are forward-looking. Critics argue they are built on fantasy economics and naive internationalism.
Just while I have you, could I just ask your opinion very briefly on the EU deal?
It's a complete surrender. I mean, I crossed swords with the Prime Minister about this in the Commons this afternoon. In a nutshell, complete surrender on fish and complete surrender on what's called dynamic alignment, which is a fancy phrase, but what it means is if in certain areas like veterinary science and food production, and that ultimately affects all of us, if the EU change their rules in those areas, we follow them automatically. We dynamically align. They move, we change, they move, we move. And we would do that automatically once we've signed up for this, even if Parliament disagreed with the change that the EU were proposing. The PM and I got into a bit of a spat about how that works. Ultimately, I'm absolutely clear on this. In the event of a dispute over that, the European Court of Justice has the final say, so effectively the EU has the final say. Why does all this matter? Because we become a rule taker. We go back to a position similar to when we were in the EU, that they make rules and we passively have to agree with them. That is totally and utterly against the spirit of the referendum when the British people voted peacefully and democratically to leave the EU and to take back control of our own laws to Parliament. Starmer just gave that away.
Conservative MP and Shadow Defence Minister Mark Francois has launched a ferocious attack on Sir Keir Starmer's proposed UK-EU agreement, branding it a complete surrender during a no-holds-barred interview on a Talkdeal. In a moment that crystallised the brewing backlash on the Tory right, Francois accused the Labour leader of dragging Britain back under Brussels rule and betraying the spirit of Brexit. Francois's remarks came in the wake of Labour's newly revealed framework for an enhanced UK-EU partnership, one that emphasises closer regulatory alignment, smoother trade in goods, and improved diplomatic relations. While Starmer has insisted the UK will not rejoin the EU, its single market or customs union, the deal's commitment to voluntary alignment on standards has sparked fury from Brexiteers. What especially rankled Francois was the spectre of adynamic alignment, a legal mechanism that would require the UK to update its laws in tandem with EU rule changes in certain sectors in exchange for streamlined trade access. Labour sources argue such alignment would be limited and focused on practical areas like food safety, environmental regulations, and manufacturing standards. For Keir Starmer, the challenge is a delicate one. Labour's policy seeks to strike a balance between economic pragmatism and political optics, reassuring European partners that Britain is a stable, cooperative neighbour, while avoiding any perception of reversing Brexit. The party insists that its proposal respects the 2016 referendum and the 2019 general election outcome. Francois's intervention also suggests the Conservative Party is preparing to go back on the offensive over Brexit, a policy area that once delivered them a landslide and now risks becoming a liability. With the economy stagnant and Tory poll numbers sagging, turning Labour's EU engagement into a wedge issue could prove politically strategic. As Labour prepares to formalise its EU strategy in the coming months, one thing is certain. If Mark Francois and his faction have their way, the battle for Britain's post-Brexit identity is far from over. The question now is whether the country wants to reheat the Brexit wars or finally move on.